This is an AQA Psychology A-Level revision video for the Paper 1 topic of attachments with a specific focus on the Schaffer and Emerson research and theory. So let's have a look at where this revision video sits into the bigger picture. You've got stages of attachment identified by Schaffer and multiple attachments. So the two link. Now the research and the stages of attachment was conducted by Schaffer and Emerson, but on the specification it is just Schaffer's name. So you don't necessarily need to know Emerson's name, but I always put them as a pair. So we start with their study, which was a longitudinal study on 60 babies in Glasgow, consisted of observations and interviews with the mothers and the babies. So it's a longitudinal study because it was carried out over a long period of time. They visited mother and baby monthly for the first year of the child's life and then returned again once the child was 18 months old. They considered separation anxiety and stranger distress in their observations. So how did the child react to the mother going into the shops briefly, leaving them in the pushchair outside the shops, or leaving the room briefly, and how did the infant respond to being around strangers, unfamiliar faces, unfamiliar people? So they measured whether the babies whimpered, cried, or showed signs of distress at a strange face, and also interviewed the mothers about the baby's response to being left outside of a shop, being with a babysitter, or being put to bed at night. The mothers had to rate their baby's responses on a 4-point scale from no protest shown to cries loudly every time. So that is the procedure that Schaffer and Emerson used. It's worthwhile noting down the things highlighted in yellow because they are what we will revisit in a moment when we evaluate this study. So this is an opportunity to pause the video and already be thinking about some AO3. Maybe add it to your notes in a different coloured pen if you've already got some ideas. In 5 seconds, I will move on to the findings. So Schaffer and Emerson found attachment behaviours did form in stages which were connected with the age of the children. What they found in common across the 60 babies was that they showed separation anxiety from between 6 to 8 months, which showed an attachment had formed between the infant and the caregiver. They found stranger anxiety came around a month later at 9 months. They also found after the first attachment was formed, babies were then able to make more attachments with a variety of people they saw regularly. So it shows the importance of having that first primary attachment. Most of the attachments were made to the mother, so first attachments were made to the mother. Only 3% were to the father as a first attachment. Over a quarter of the infants attached both, but interestingly, attachments weren't necessarily made to the person who carried out the physical care. So it wasn't to do with those who fed and changed the baby. It was actually due to the quality of attachment, the emotional support, the contact comfort, if you like, from Harlow's animal study. And in almost 40% of the babies, the person who cared for the child wasn't the first attachment figure. So often grandparents or childminders would step in to care for the baby after baby is attached to mother. So those are the findings from the Schaffer and Emerson study. This now is an opportunity to evaluate the study, consider the questions on screen, and then we will move on in 5 seconds once you've got some ideas together. Okay, so thinking about whether each of these statements are strengths or weaknesses. Families were studied in their own homes. It was a longitudinal design, studying the same children over a period of time. Observations and interviews were used. 60 babies from the same city, area and social class. Study was conducted over 60 years ago. So an opportunity for you to pause the video as these points will form the basis of some peel paragraphs for this study. And in 5 seconds, we will look at the answers. So, of course, the fact the study was carried out in their own homes is going to be good. It's true to life. It's got ecological validity, making the findings useful. It was a longitudinal design consisting of a variety of methods, which makes the data rich and detailed, and triangulation makes the study more valid. So you're combining observations with data from interviews and detailed accounts. So you can check the quality and check that everything matches. So that's definitely a strength. They also studied the same babies over that length of time, allowed them to establish the development of attachments, which is what they were interested in. However, the sort of interviews with the mothers could lead to demand characteristics, which means that they might have been social desirability bias. The mothers might have lied and said, actually, my baby doesn't cry when I'm not there, because they might have thought that's the desirable thing to say. So you're not getting very valid information. 60 is a very small sample. They were all from the same area and social class, so you can't generalise. And then, of course, the time that the study was conducted over 60 years ago, child rearing was left to women back then. So actually, what's the use now? It's very era dependent. Would we still get these same findings, or do we find that actually babies form multiple attachments much earlier on in their lives? There's lots of things to be explored there. So those are the strengths and weaknesses of the study. However, it's Schaffer and Emerson's theory that is crucial here. So Schaffer and Emerson used that study to develop this theory that we're about to look at, which is about the stages of attachment, which identify a sequence of different behaviours, qualitatively different behaviours. So that means the information from each stage sort of changes and links with each age. As each infant gets older, the behaviour changes. And then ultimately the last stage is the multiple attachments, where they can develop attachments to others once they've got that main attachment to their caregiver, to their primary caregiver. So looking at the 4 stages of attachment according to Schaffer and Emerson, we can ignore this column here. This is just if you're making notes, you can draw a symbol or a picture to represent each stage. But you've got, first of all, the asocial stage, which is from 6 weeks of age, where infants will attach to any human, not a long-lasting attachment. So they don't have a bias to any particular human at this point. So they're not bothered around anybody, essentially. But they do prefer human-like stimuli. So they would prefer a doll that looks like a human compared to like a teddy bear, for example. Then the indiscriminate attachment is 6 weeks to 6 months, where the babies become more sociable. But in that respect, we just mean they're able to tell people apart and they begin to form stronger attachments, but they don't progress too much and they don't have any fear of strangers. It's not until the specific or the discriminate attachment stage at 7 months plus, up until around 1 year, where the infant will then start to show separation anxiety and protest by crying when their primary attachment figure leaves a room, and they will start to show fear of strangers, which is what was explored in Schaffer and Emerson's study. One of their key findings. Then moving on to multiple attachments, which Schaffer and Emerson suggest occurs at 1 year on, when they begin to make multiple attachments towards friends of the family, grandparents, childminders, etc. So this is an opportunity to pause the video and summarise each stage, because in a moment you're going to be considering which stage and why. So in 5 seconds I will move on. Okay, so have a little read of the 4 babies and see if you can put them into the appropriate stage and consider reasons why they are in the stage you claim they are. In 5 seconds, we'll look at the answers. Okay, so Michelle is in the specific or discriminate attachment stage. She's got a preference for one caregiver, which is her mom. If anyone picks her up, she's separation or stranger anxiety. Graham is asocial because he's got a similar response towards objects, his teddy bear and people, but he does have a preference for faces. Jim is indiscriminate because he's got a preference for human company over no human company, so that's more sociable stage. And then Ruth is multiple because she's got attachment behaviours towards lots of different people. She has separation and stranger anxiety from everyone she's attached to. So now you've applied your knowledge, what we've got to do is move on to evaluate the theory of attachment according to Schaffer and Emerson. So there's 3 questions on the screen for you to consider, the answers to, and in 5 seconds we'll go through them in detail. So the issues with Schaffer and Emerson's theory is that actually at the asocial stage, there's not much taking place. Babies are far too young, they've got poor coordination, they're immobile. So it's hard to make any judgments about them based on observations of the behaviour, because there isn't much observable behaviour. So we're not sure actually if we're getting much valid, reliable evidence or a theory from the asocial stage, because there's not much going on to study. There's a lack of generalisability massively, because in different cultural contexts, for example, in Asian households where extended families are common and there's multiple caregivers, actually babies form attachment from the outset of their birth, not at 1 year. And that research comes from Van Eichendorn et al. In 1993. So you've got collectivist cultures because the families work together jointly in everything, which is your extended families and your example of Asian households. And then measuring multiple attachments, there might be a problem with how it's assessed. Just because a baby gets a distress when an individual leaves the room, it doesn't mean that they're attached to them. So Bowlby, who we will look at in future videos, pointed out children have playmates as well as attachment figures. So they could get distressed when a playmate leaves the room, but it doesn't mean that they're attached. This is a problem because Schaffer and Emerson's stages, they state that actually the distress is due to attachment, and actually it doesn't leave us a way to distinguish between behaviour shown towards secondary attachment figures and those between playmates. So we don't actually know in that multiple attachment stage what are we measuring. Is it a playmate? Is it an attachment figure? Have they actually formed multiple attachments at this stage, at this age? And lastly, there is a lot of conflicting evidence on multiple attachments. Yes, children can make multiple attachments at some point, but it's not entirely clear when, and you can link that back to the cultural context point. Some research indicates that most, if not all, babies form attachments to a single main carer before they develop multiple attachments. So that bit is in line with Schaffer and Emerson's theory, but generally these are the three key weaknesses of their theory and the stages of attachment. And that concludes the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.